So in honoring you and Senator Simpson, what we are trying to draw attention to is, of course, the contribution that you made by co-sponsoring the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, now 25 years ago. And that was, of course, very important because of the framework that it set up for addressing illegal immigration. It was also particularly notable, and maybe in retrospect as much or more so, because of the truly bipartisan way in which you did it. By most counts, this was at least an 8-year effort. Yes. It was 2 years in the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy, the Hesburgh Commission, where the basic ideas were developed. And then it was 6 years of very hard work in the Congress to actually get it done. So we're going to talk about that journey a little bit. You and Senator Simpson were obviously from opposite parties, different parts of the country, in the Senate, in the House. The Senate was under Republican leadership, the House was in Democratic leadership. How did you develop that trust?
I think the trust was twofold, Doris. I think one is the trust that Al had with me and I had with him, between ourselves. And then the trust that I think we had with our colleagues, Al in the Senate and I in the House. As far as the trust between Al and me, it was really formed in some of you might remember conferences that the Brookings sponsored down at Williamsburg that brought together the Justice Department, the Judiciary Committees of both houses, and the courts system. I remember once Justice Berger came, and Al came to those, and Ann as well. We became friends, and so we had that kind of trustworthiness. I think Al never felt, and I certainly had no reason to think that either one of us was trying to gain a political advantage or some party advantage. We were trying to do a tough job in the best way we could do it. So we had trust within ourselves, and as I mentioned to you once, we were probably the first two to have joint House-Senate hearings. And I remember Time magazine featured that because that just hadn't been done before. Also, Al and I traveled around the country to talk to different interest groups about the bill. And of course, as you know, Al is 6'9" and I'm not 6'9", so it was like, you know, the odd couple of immigration. But we would go to these places, and Al is a cowboy, Wyoming cowboys. He said, well, just like the cowboys of old, you go in back to back, you know, protecting one another's back. So we did that in a sort of allegorical way, and I think we had the trust of our colleagues because neither one of us was trying to gain political advantage. Each one of us was, I think, a person of his word. Each one of us respected the assembly and the body. We respected government and felt that there was a role. So I think we had trust between the two of us. We had trust with our colleagues, and that allowed us to, after this arduous odyssey of 6 years, almost 8 counting the commission, to be able to put a job done, a job on the table, which eventually President Reagan signed.
Well, you know, one of the things about immigration that's always been so curious is that the disagreements tend to be as strong within each of the parties as they are between the parties. So I wonder whether you could reflect a little bit on what some of the tensions were within the Democratic Party, and what were the hardest compromises that the Democrats had to make and the hardest compromises that the Republicans had to make?
Well, within the Democratic side, I think there were areas of strong disagreement with groups in organized labor because of the part of our bill, the three-legged stool. Part of it was an agriculture temporary worker bill, and there was a fear that that would bring in cheap labor and some way to undercut organized labor. So there was tension there, tension with demographic and environmental groups because they're just how many people can you assimilate, bringing more people in either through legalization or just by having a temporary worker program could strain natural resources and strain the environment. So he had difficulties there. Civil liberties, and Al brought up in vivid detail in his own colorful way about the fact with the swipe card, the possibility of an identifier being an invasion of civil liberties and somehow an inhibition in that regard. And immigrant advocacy groups felt that the striking of the Texas proviso, which meant that you could have enforcement at the workplace with employers, was once again aimed at minorities and therefore had a certain discriminatory elements. So within the Democratic side of it, there was quite a little roiling and flux and trying to get all these pieces together. Within the Republican side, I mean, you had a lot of business groups that didn't like they wanted to keep the Texas proviso, which allowed them to hire knowingly undocumented aliens. And there were obviously in certain agricultural groups, you didn't do enough. We need more people than the H-2A program. So there were a lot of tensions, and how we resolved them, I think, almost gets back to the trust factor. I remember vividly, and so I was on the floor today showing some friends around, and I remember vividly when we had 3 different votes, I guess, and this was probably the last one, and 2 members that I know on their own part were not particularly devoted to the bill. But they came up to me and essentially said something to the effect that we're going to vote for this, to get this off the floor into conference with the Senate on the surmise and the prediction and plan and hope that you'll round off the rough edges and send a bill back that we can really vote for. So I think it was in the Senate the same way. Probably members of the Senate voted for that bill, not because they thought every jot and tittle of our bill was it, or we had the gold standard, but because Al Simpson was a man of his word, and he would stick behind it and not bring something to the floor that was going to cause them grief. So I think that we got over the tensions because we worked hard 6 years, kept going at it, persistence, patience, and turning out a work product that I think we could always say, if not this, what?
Well, let me give you the opportunity to just share with us what's been your greatest satisfaction about all of this, looking back on it. And if you have any advice to your successors, we'd love to hear it.
Let me get to the advice first. Wear steel underwear. Always steel underwear. That's the advice for anybody who wants to get into the field. As to the greatest joy, and Bishop DiMarzio and I have been friends for a long time when he was Father DiMarzio, and now he's Bishop. But it's seeing, and you talk about people. Dimitri, you brought up people. We're here to help people, sometimes disadvantaged people, people who are marginalized, people on the outside who wish to come in and should come in. And to be able to do that through legalization, one of the most tangled issues that it presents itself again today with, who knows, 11 million people here without papers, but it presented itself then with 5 to 8 million. But we did something that we needed to do as part of the 3-legged stool: legalization, work enforcement, and temporary worker, by allowing these people who are here, good people, hardworking people, God-fearing people, to somehow earn a regular status. And when I was in 1996, after I left here in 95, but in 1996, I went to El Paso, and for a naturalization ceremony. I've been at many of them and spoken at many of them, and they're wonderful. I've always told people who have really argument about immigration, and you can have it, but please go to one naturalization ceremony in your lifetime, and you will see all of the threads of immigration weaving themselves into that beautiful tapestry that we call America. But it was in El Paso, several thousand people, many of whom were being made citizens by reason of the legalization bill. Wonderful. I might say also, as a little sidebar to the story, it was in the University of Texas El Paso field house. And some of you might remember back when it was Texas Western. It was an all-black basketball team that played the all-white University of Kentucky basketball team and won the national championships. And festooned from the top of this were all these banners celebrating the university, well, celebrating Texas Western, but not celebrating University of Kentucky. So here I am as a Kentuckian down there. I have to sort of bear the ignominy of being reminded, that we didn't win a national championship. But of course, as the further sidebar is that just you might integrated collegiate basketball that day and forevermore. But seeing those people, Doris, becoming citizens, having a right to venture into the future, free of any worry, free of any concern, is really the greatest joy, along with working with this guy, Al, who's, as I say in my own ways, a piece of work, and to have worked with a piece of work is not a bad day's work in itself.
Well, I'm sure everybody here joins me in saying thank you for your contribution. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.